What would you do if, just days after burying your husband of over 50 years, the very man who stood by you at the funeral came knocking at your door, not with comfort, not with kindness, but with a demand for the roof over your head? It sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? For me, it was reality. My husband Arthur had barely been laid to rest, the scent of lilies from the service still clinging to the air inside our Albany home, when grief turned into something far heavier, a fight for the very house we built together. The silence in those days after his funeral was unlike anything I had ever known. Every corner of the house whispered his absence. His armchair by the window remained untouched, the newspaper folded neatly on the side table, as though he would stroll in at any moment to pick it up. 52 years of life together does not simply fade, it lingers, it aches. My body, already marked by the weight of 83 years, carried the loss like a stone on my chest. Even opening jars with my aching hands felt impossible without him. So when the doorbell rang that morning, I forced myself upright, leaning on the doorframe for strength. Through the peephole, I saw a face that mirrored Arthur's just enough to make my heart falter, his younger brother Mark. He was dressed neatly, with a salesman's smile and a tray of muffins in his hands. To any outsider, it might have looked like an act of brotherly concern. To me, it was the beginning of a storm I could never have imagined. "Anya, I was just in the neighborhood," he said warmly as I opened the door. Before I could answer, he stepped inside, setting the muffins down as if he owned the place. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes lingering not with affection but with an appraising glint, as though he were calculating the value of the furniture, the antiques, the house itself. My stomach turned. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Thank you, Mark, but really I'm fine." He ignored my protest, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table. "You shouldn't be alone in this big house, Anya. It's too much for you. The upkeep, the taxes, everything Arthur used to handle. He wouldn't want you carrying that burden." His tone was soothing, almost pitying, but every word felt like a needle. My chest tightened. "This is my home," I said firmly. "Arthur and I built it together. You know that." Mark leaned forward, lowering his voice. Of course. But there's something you don't know. Arthur worried about you more than you realize. He told me, if anything happened to him, I was to make sure you were taken care of. He made arrangements for the house." His words struck like ice in my veins. Arrangements? My husband and I had written a will years ago. Everything was clear. The house was mine, and then would pass to our children. I shook my head, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Mark's smile thinned. From his briefcase, he pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the table. My trembling hands unfolded it. The words swam before my eyes, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable, Arthur's. It wasn't a will. It was some kind of business agreement, legal jargon I could barely understand, but its meaning was clear enough. The house, the very heart of my life, was being claimed as collateral for a debt I had never known existed. I stared at the page, my heart pounding in my ears. Grief had already hollowed me out, but betrayal from the man who shared my husband's blood, cut deeper still. If you believe no grieving widow should ever have her home snatched away, hit subscribe right now. And if for some reason you choose not to, at least tell us why in the comments, because every woman deserves to feel safe after loss. Mark's presence in my kitchen that morning was like a shadow creeping in where sunlight had once lived. He sat there, hands folded neatly, smiling as if he had only my best interests at heart. The tray of muffins, still warm under their foil, filled the room with the scent of blueberries, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. My grief had left me hollow, and now his words were beginning to carve at what little strength I had left. "Anya, you're carrying too much," he said softly, as though he were a confidant. "Arthur worried about you. He told me this house might be too much for you alone. He wanted me to make sure you didn't drown under its weight." I clutched the edge of the table, my swollen knuckles white against the wood. Arthur never said anything like that to me. He would have told me. Mark tilted his head, his salesman's grin unwavering. "You were his heart, Anya. He didn't want to worry you. He wanted to protect you. That's why he made arrangements." He gestured toward the document he had laid before me. The paper, so small and fragile in my hand, carried a weight that nearly crushed me. It wasn't a will. It wasn't the carefully drawn plan Arthur and I had made together years ago. It was something else, a business agreement, filled with clauses and terms I could barely understand. Yet one line stood out clear as day: our house listed as collateral. My breath caught. My husband's signature scrawled at the bottom was like a ghost reaching across the grave. I traced the ink with trembling fingers, trying to believe it was real, trying to deny that Arthur, my Arthur, would ever gamble with our home. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "We never lived beyond our means." Arthur hated debt. We had savings. We had everything planned. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a tone meant to sound tender, but laced with something else, conviction. "He didn't tell you because he loved you too much. There was a debt, Anya. A family debt. He promised me this house would make things right." A flush of heat rose to my face, anger burning through the fog of grief. Arthur would never use our house as a bargaining chip. He wasn't reckless. And if he owed anyone anything, he would have told me. We promised each other no secrets. Mark sighed as though burdened by a truth too heavy for me to bear. "I know it's hard to accept. But he was protecting you. He told me to take care of you, and I intend to honor that. You don't have to live with worry anymore. Let me take the house off your shoulders." The way he said it, like he was offering me a gift instead of stripping me of everything I had left, made my stomach churn. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "This is my home. Arthur and I built our life here. I won't let anyone take that from me." Mark's smile tightened. For the first time, the charm cracked, revealing impatience beneath. He tapped the document with his finger. "It's already decided, Anya. I filed the claim. The courts will see this as binding." The room tilted. "Filed a claim." Before I could demand an explanation, the shrill ring of the phone sliced through the air. My heart hammered as I reached for it, my hand shaking so violently the receiver nearly slipped. "Mrs. Harrison?" A cold, professional voice spoke. "This is Randall and Associates. We are calling to confirm that a complaint has been filed regarding the property at 145 Sycamore Lane. You will be formally served within the next 48 hours. The world fell out from under me. The receiver clattered to the hardwood floor, the voice still droning from the line. I stared at Mark, whose lips curled in a satisfied smirk. "I wanted to spare you the stress," he said, standing slowly, smoothing his jacket. "But you left me no choice. The courts will decide, and when they do, you'll see this is for the best." I wanted to scream, to throw him out, but the grief that had already hollowed me now tightened its grip with betrayal layered on top. My husband was gone, and now his brother, the man who shared his blood, was using forged words to strip me of everything I had left. "You should rest, Anya," Mark said smoothly as though he hadn't just declared war. "I'll be in touch." The door closed behind him with a click that echoed through the empty house. I stood frozen, staring at the paper still spread across my kitchen table, Arthur's signature blurring through my tears. My chest heaved, and for the first time since the funeral, grief gave way to raw fury. I bent to pick up the receiver, my arthritic fingers aching. The line had gone dead. But another call blinked on the screen, a missed call from my daughter Olivia. My heart lurched. I pressed redial. Her steady voice answered on the first ring. "Mom? You sound upset. What's wrong?" The words tumbled out in fragments. "Mark was here. He says Arthur owed him. He showed me a paper. And a lawyer just called. They're taking the house." There was silence, the kind where you can feel someone on the other end gathering their strength. "Mom, listen to me. Dad never owed anyone anything. He was meticulous with money. You know that. I'm coming over. Don't sign anything. Don't throw anything away. Just wait for me. I'll be there." Tears welled again, but this time there was a thread of relief woven through them. I wasn't alone. Olivia was coming. I sank into Arthur's chair by the window, clutching the receiver like a lifeline. The walls of my home still pulsed with memories, but now they carried the weight of a battle I hadn't asked for. Mark had made his move. The next would be mine. Olivia arrived less than an hour after my call, her footsteps brisk and purposeful as she came through the front door. My daughter had always been a source of strength, the kind of woman who walked into a room and instantly steadied the ground beneath everyone else's feet. Seeing her standing there, briefcase in hand, her sharp eyes already assessing the situation, was like a breath of air after nearly drowning. She dropped her bag on the counter and went straight to the kitchen table where the paper still lay. Without hesitation, she picked it up, scanning line after line. Her brow furrowed deeper with every sentence. "This doesn't even look legitimate, Mom. It's full of holes. Whoever drafted this wasn't careful. Dad never would have signed something like this." Her confidence was contagious, though my hands still trembled as I clutched my teacup. But his signature, it was there, Olivia. I saw it with my own eyes. Olivia looked up, her expression firm. "People forge signatures every day. That doesn't mean it's real. We'll prove it." Dad hated shortcuts. He hated lies. If this document was genuine, he would have told us. Her words soothed me like balm on a wound, but one thought still pricked at the back of my mind. Why had Mark been so certain? Why had he come here with such confidence, filing a claim before I even had the chance to catch my breath? Olivia set the paper down and crossed her arms. "There's something missing. Dad would never leave things unfinished. Let's check his study." Arthur's study had always been his domain. I rarely entered unless invited, respecting it as his space. The moment we stepped inside, the smell of his cologne lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the musk of old books. The desk, cluttered but organized in its own way, looked exactly as he had left it. Tax folders, insurance forms, even envelopes neatly labeled with the children's names. I lowered myself into his chair, my joints protesting, and opened the top drawer. Receipts, bank statements, letters. But nothing about a debt. My frustration grew as I shuffled through more drawers. He kept everything so neatly. If there were papers about the so-called agreement, they'd be here. Olivia moved toward the corner, her gaze landing on the dusty computer Arthur had stubbornly held on to. He had never upgraded, claiming the old one still did the job. She pressed the power button, and with a long whir, the machine came to life. The screen flickered, showing a cluttered desktop with folders labeled taxes, bills, family photos. But Olivia's sharp eyes caught something else, a small, unmarked folder tucked behind a game of solitaire. She clicked it. A password prompt appeared. I felt my chest tighten. He mentioned once that he kept personal files. I thought he was joking. "I don't know the password." Olivia tried a few obvious ones. Our wedding date, her birthday, even the name of Arthur's fishing boat from years ago. Nothing worked. She tapped her lip, thinking, then entered a long combination of numbers and letters that made no sense to me. The screen blinked, and suddenly, a document appeared. The title froze me in place, For Anya. My hand flew to my mouth as Olivia opened it. The first line read, "To my dearest Anya, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you." The words blurred through my tears, but Olivia read them aloud, her voice steady. Arthur's confession unfolded in sentences that felt like blows to my heart. He admitted that long before we met, he had made mistakes, terrible financial choices, ties with the wrong people. He had even changed his name to escape a man named Reginald who had threatened to expose him. I gripped the edge of the desk, my body shaking. He changed his name? He hid this from me. Olivia placed her hand gently on my shoulder. He wasn't hiding it to hurt you, Mom. He was protecting you. But as we scrolled further, the words became even more chilling. At the very bottom of the letter, written in a different font, was a line that made my blood run cold. Arthur's brother Mark has all of my legal documents for my name change. If anything happens to me, you must get those papers from him. They prove my identity is legitimate. Trust no one. The room seemed to close in around me. My husband's life, the man I had shared decades with, was not the whole story I thought it was. And now Mark, the man who had just stood in my kitchen smiling over muffins, was holding the key to Arthur's past. I looked at Olivia, my voice breaking. He told me to trust no one. And I let Mark in. I believed his lies. Olivia's jaw tightened, her eyes blazing. That ends now. Mark isn't just after the house. He's after those papers. But he made one mistake. He underestimated us. Her words lit a fire inside me. Grief still pressed down like a weight, but beneath it rose something else, resolve. I wasn't just a widow to be pushed aside. I was a woman with a fight ahead, and I had my daughter by my side. Strong women don't stay silent when family betrays them. If you'd stand up too, subscribe now so you never miss stories of courage like this. And if you wouldn't, explain in the comments, because some of us grannies refuse to be silent victims. That night, I sat awake in Arthur's chair, staring at the dim glow of the lamp across the room. My body ached, my hip throbbed, but my mind would not rest. The letter's warning repeated in my head like a drumbeat. Trust no one. Mark held Arthur's documents. He was not just circling the house. He was circling Arthur's very identity, and by extension mine. Olivia paced the living room, her sharp mind already weaving a plan. "Mom," she said finally, "we need to get him to reveal himself. If he thinks you're ready to give up, he'll get careless. That's when we'll catch him." Her words carried certainty, and I nodded, even though the thought of facing Mark again made my stomach twist. Still, the anger inside me burned brighter than fear. "Call him," I said. "Tell him I'll meet him." The next morning, I dialed his number with hands that trembled only slightly. When he answered, I softened my voice, making it quiver with false surrender. "Mark, I've been thinking. You were right. I can't manage this alone. Maybe we can settle things quietly. Could we meet?" The satisfaction in his voice was almost smug. "Of course, Anya. I knew you'd see reason. How about the cafe near the courthouse? The daily grind. My lawyer is often there. It'll make everything easier." "Tomorrow morning," I whispered. "Perfect. I'll see you then." He hung up, and I sat back in the chair, my heart hammering. Olivia placed a steady hand on mine. "We've got him exactly where we want him." The next morning was brisk and gray, the kind of weather that carried a sharp edge. I wore a simple wool coat and a shawl Arthur had bought me years ago. I wanted to look frail, vulnerable, the grieving widow ready to concede. Olivia, however, looked sharp and unyielding in a tailored blazer. Together, we walked into the daily grind, the smell of fresh coffee wrapping around us. Mark was already there, seated at a corner table with his ever-present briefcase at his side. His smile spread wide as he rose to greet me, pulling out a chair as though he were a gentleman doing me a favor. "This is much better," he said warmly. "No more hostility. Just two family members working things out." I lowered myself into the chair, my hip protesting, and folded my hands in my lap. "I thought about what you said. Maybe Arthur did keep things from me. Maybe you really are only trying to help." His eyes gleamed with triumph. "Exactly. That's what I've been saying all along. We can make this painless, Anya. No need for lawyers. No need for courts." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "But Mark, I found something. Arthur left me a letter. A very personal one." His smile faltered. "A letter?" "Yes," I said, watching his face carefully. "He wrote about his past. About a name he once used. About the documents you have in your possession." For the first time, his mask cracked. His eyes widened, just for a split second, before he forced a chuckle. "Anya, you must be confused. Arthur was a straightforward man. He didn't keep secrets from you." Olivia's voice cut in like a blade. "The letter mentions a name change. It also mentions you, Mark. Dad trusted you with papers that prove who he really was. Which means you're holding evidence that could easily be used in a criminal case, if it isn't already part of one." Mark's hand tightened around his coffee mug, knuckles white. His voice grew strained. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is nonsense." "Then why," Olivia pressed, leaning forward, "did Dad warn Mom not to trust anyone? Why does the letter point directly at you?" Mark's composure snapped. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "This conversation is over," he muttered, snatching up his briefcase. "Sit down, Mark," I said firmly, surprising even myself. My voice no longer trembled. "Not until you tell me where those papers are." His gaze flicked between us, panic flashing across his features. Without another word, he bolted for the door. "Mom, come on." Olivia pulled me to my feet, and we hurried outside just in time to see Mark sprint to his car, a dented sedan that coughed smoke as it roared to life. He tore out of the lot, tires squealing. "Get in," Olivia commanded, unlocking her car. I slid into the passenger seat, my heart pounding with adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. We followed close behind. Mark weaved through traffic recklessly, running lights, cutting corners. He wasn't driving toward his lawyer's office or the courthouse. He was heading out of the polished center of town and into the worn outskirts where neglected apartment buildings leaned tiredly against one another. My breath came in short bursts, my hip aching from the strain of rushing, but I held tight to the armrest. "He's not the successful man he pretends to be," I said bitterly. "This is where he belongs." Olivia's jaw was set, her hands gripping the wheel. "He's been lying about everything. And now we're about to see how deep those lies go." We trailed him into a cracked parking lot beside a sagging apartment complex. Mark parked hastily, leaving his door ajar as he disappeared inside. Olivia slowed to a stop a few buildings down, her eyes never leaving the entrance. "Stay here, Mom," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'll go after him." But I shook my head, a surge of stubborn fire rising in me. "No. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'll sit quietly while he steals what Arthur left me. Not this time. I'm going with you." Olivia looked at me, torn between protectiveness and respect. Then she nodded once. "All right. But stay close." Leaning on her arm for balance, I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting my cheeks. My body ached, every step a reminder of my years, but my spirit felt steadier than it had in weeks. This wasn't just about saving the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my strength. Together, we walked toward the open doorway, the faint sounds of Mark moving frantically inside reaching our ears. My heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the resolve hardening within me. Arthur had told me to trust no one. But I trusted Olivia. And with her by my side, I was ready to face whatever truth waited beyond that door. The hallway of the building reeked of old food and stale smoke. Paint peeled from the walls in strips, and dim bulbs buzzed weakly overhead. It was a far cry from the polished life Mark pretended to lead when he came into my home with his tray of muffins and his honeyed words. Olivia steadied me as we reached the last door on the hall. It was ajar, just as the building's entrance had been. Mark's carelessness reeked of desperation. Olivia pushed the door open, and the sight that greeted us sucked the air from my lungs. The apartment was a disaster. Pizza boxes and half-empty cans littered the counters. Stacks of unopened mail and crumpled envelopes covered the floor. Empty liquor bottles lined the windowsill. It was not the home of a successful businessman. It was the den of a man barely holding himself together. Olivia whispered, "This is who he really is." My eyes scanned the room, landing on a half-packed duffel bag near the sofa. Beside it sat the leather briefcase I had seen in his hand at my kitchen table. My breath caught. That case had seemed so ordinary then, but now it pulsed with menace. We moved closer, every step cautious. The apartment was silent, though the sound of hurried footsteps from the stairwell a moment earlier told us Mark had fled. Olivia crouched beside the case, her fingers nimble as she clicked it open. Inside were no legal papers binding Arthur to debts. No property deeds transferring ownership. Instead, a tangle of documents spilled out, bank statements, loan records, tax files, all in Mark's name. The numbers screamed of overdrafts, defaults, and fraudulent transfers. Entire pages showed money funneled from a charitable foundation into accounts under aliases. Olivia's face hardened as she read. "He's been embezzling for years, covering one hole with another. This has nothing to do with Dad." Nothing. I reached for a smaller notebook tucked in the corner of the case. Its leather cover was worn, its pages filled with neat, obsessive handwriting. Names, figures, coded notes about payments and threats. And then, between the scribbles, I found photographs, old black-and-white prints of two young men. One was Arthur, smiling the same gentle smile I had fallen in love with decades ago. The other was Mark, or at least, the man I thought was Mark. They were side by side, their resemblance striking, though Arthur's eyes carried warmth while his brother's gaze already hinted at calculation. But as I turned to the back of the notebook, my hand froze. Tucked into the final pages was a letter, yellowed with age. It was written by a woman, addressed to my beloved husband. My pulse quickened as I scanned the words. She spoke of loyalty, of love, and she called him by a name that was not Mark. Reginald. The room tilted. My knees weakened. Olivia steadied me, but I could barely breathe. Mark wasn't just Arthur's greedy younger brother. He wasn't Mark at all. He was Reginald, the very man Arthur had been running from all those years ago. The truth crashed over me in waves. Arthur hadn't changed his name because he was guilty of terrible crimes. He had changed it to protect us, to shield me and our children from the shadow of a man who had threatened him long ago. All those years, I thought Arthur was hiding shame. Instead, he was hiding me from danger. He was keeping us safe from Reginald, who had now slithered back into our lives under the guise of family. I looked down at the briefcase, the pages of fraud and betrayal spilling across the dingy carpet. The puzzle pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Mark, or Reginald, had used Arthur's death as an opening to reclaim what he had always wanted, a way to erase his own crimes by planting them at Arthur's feet. He tried to replace Dad with himself, Olivia said, her voice trembling with anger. He wanted the house, the documents, everything that would let him bury his past and live as someone else. My chest burned. For weeks, grief had weighed me down, but at that moment, anger lifted me higher than pain. I wasn't just a widow fighting for her home anymore. I was a wife fighting for the truth of her husband's life. I gathered the papers into my lap, the leather case cool under my arthritic hands. He underestimated us, I whispered. He thought age made me blind, that loss made me weak. But I see him now. Olivia crouched beside me, her eyes meeting mine. We have everything we need to expose him. He can't hide behind Arthur anymore. The court will see through him. Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't born of grief. They were born of fury and resolve. Arthur had spent his life protecting me. Now it was my turn to protect his memory. We packed the briefcase and notebook into Olivia's bag, carefully sliding the incriminating papers into protective sleeves. Every page felt like a weapon, not one of violence, but of truth. And truth was stronger than any forged signature or smug smile Mark could wield. As we stood to leave, I took one last look around the apartment. The filth, the half-empty bottles, the lies scattered across every surface. It was all a reflection of a man who had spent his life deceiving everyone, including himself. Olivia placed her arm around me as we walked back into the hallway. My hips screamed in protest, but I straightened my shoulders. Age had weathered me. Grief had nearly broken me, but strength came in many forms. That night, it came in the form of resolve etched into my bones. Arthur wasn't guilty. He had never gambled our home, never betrayed me. The shame belonged entirely to the man who dared to use his bloodline as a mask. Reginald. The name alone filled me with disgust. But saying it in my head gave me clarity. He could call himself Mark to the world, but I knew the truth. And soon the world would too. As we stepped out of the building, the evening air cut sharp against my face, but I inhaled deeply. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a helpless widow waiting for the next blow. I felt like a warrior carrying evidence, ready to defend my home, my husband's honor, and my own dignity. If you believe truth must always win over lies, subscribe right now and stand with every woman who refuses to be deceived. But if you think lies should go unchallenged, write in the comments why, because justice has no age limit. The day after we uncovered the truth in Reginald's apartment, Olivia arranged for us to meet a lawyer she trusted. The weight of the briefcase sat beside me in the car like a constant reminder of the battle ahead. I clutched it with aching hands, refusing to let it out of my sight. We arrived at a modest law office downtown. Inside, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence greeted us. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm Ms. Alvarez. Please sit." Her voice carried both authority and warmth, and I felt an instant sense of steadiness. Olivia explained everything quickly. The false claim, the forged document, the threatening phone call, and finally, the discovery of Reginald's fraud-filled briefcase. Ms. Alvarez listened carefully, her expression shifting from polite neutrality to astonishment as Olivia laid out the evidence. She slid on a pair of glasses and flipped through the bank records, the notebook, and the photographs. "This isn't just a family dispute," she said at last, her voice low and deliberate. "This is fraud layered upon fraud. He filed a claim against your property under a false identity, and worse, he's carrying decades of financial crimes on his shoulders. Mrs. Harrison, you're not the one on trial here, he is. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but not from fear. For the first time, I felt the scales tilting in my favor. Olivia leaned forward. So how do we fight back? Ms. Alvarez tapped the briefcase. We file a countersuit. His claim is built on a forged agreement and a stolen identity. The court will see through it once these documents are presented. What we need to do is make the case airtight. That means gathering everything. Arthur's original will, your financial history, any correspondence that proves your husband had no debts. We want to leave no doubt that Reginald fabricated his story from beginning to end. The list of tasks felt overwhelming, but Olivia's hand covered mine. We'll get it all, Mom. Together. The next week blurred into a series of long hours and heavy conversations. Olivia pulled Arthur's files from storage, boxes of tax returns and bank statements dating back decades. Each page spoke of responsibility, honesty, and foresight, qualities Arthur had lived by. Nothing hinted at the reckless debt Reginald claimed. I spent hours with Ms. Alvarez, answering questions that made me relive both my marriage and my grief. She asked about Arthur's character, his habits, his philosophies. Each answer painted a picture of the man I had loved. Steady, careful, protective. Not once in our half-century together had he hidden debt from me. The lie Reginald tried to spin unraveled with every memory I shared. But the preparation wasn't only about documents and testimony. It was also about me. Ms. Alvarez leaned across the table one afternoon, her tone gentle but firm. Mrs. Harrison, when you take the stand, the other side will try to portray you as confused, fragile, incapable of handling your affairs. You must show them that isn't true. Your strength is your truth. Don't hide it. Her words struck deep. For weeks, I had moved through life feeling like grief had reduced me to a shell. My hands hurt, my hip throbbed, my body betrayed my age at every turn. But I realized those things didn't erase my strength. They simply framed it differently. Survival through pain was its own kind of power. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I stared at Arthur's photograph. His smile, kind and steady, seemed to meet mine. I whispered aloud, I'll defend you. I'll defend us. I'm not afraid anymore. On the morning of the pretrial hearing, Olivia and I dressed with purpose. She wore another sharp blazer, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. I chose a simple dark dress and my wool shawl, a symbol of humility, but also resolve. My cane rested against the wall, not as a sign of weakness but as proof I had carried myself through storms before. As we drove to the courthouse to file the countersuit, Ms. Alvarez briefed us on the process. Once we submit this evidence, his case begins to collapse. He doesn't know you have this briefcase. He still believes he can intimidate you into surrendering. Let's use that to our advantage. I nodded, clutching the handle of the case in my lap. He'll see soon enough that I am not surrendering. Filing the countersuit felt like striking a match in the dark. The paperwork was thick, the language dense, but the meaning was simple. I was no longer the one defending myself. I was accusing him. The days leading up to trial were filled with preparation. Olivia rehearsed questions with me, running through possible challenges from the opposing lawyer. They'll say you're too old to remember details. They'll say grief clouded your judgment. What will you answer? I straightened my back, my voice steady. I'll tell them grief doesn't erase 52 years of marriage. I remember every promise Arthur ever made. And I know he never promised that house to Reginald. Olivia's eyes softened. That's perfect, Mom. We practiced until my throat ached, but with each run-through, I felt my fear lessen. Confidence built where sorrow had once lived. The night before the trial, I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I sat at Arthur's desk, the briefcase beside me, and wrote a few lines in my journal. He thought he could erase you with lies. Tomorrow, I will make sure the truth speaks louder than his schemes. I closed the journal, my heart steady. The woman who had trembled in her kitchen weeks earlier was gone. I wasn't just preparing for court. I was preparing to defend my life, my home, and my husband's honor. And this time I was ready. The morning of the trial arrived cold and gray. My hip throbbed with each step as Olivia and I entered the courthouse, but I refused to lean too heavily on my cane. This wasn't just about walking through a building. It was about walking into the arena where truth would be tested. The courtroom itself was stark and intimidating, its high ceilings echoing with quiet murmurs from strangers waiting for their cases to be called. At the front sat Judge Evans, a woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her presence radiated calm authority. On the opposite side of the aisle sat Reginald, still clinging to the name mark, dressed in a sharp suit that looked borrowed rather than earned. His lawyer, a young man with a jittery energy, shuffled through his notes. Reginald glanced at me with a smirk, as though this was already won. When the judge called our case, the room stilled. Reginald's lawyer rose first, eager to seize the stage. He launched into a performance filled with feigned concern. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing toward me, "my client only wishes to honor his late brother's wishes. The defendant, Mrs. Harrison, is an elderly widow who has unfortunately misremembered key details due to her grief. While we sympathize deeply with her loss, we must face the reality that Mr. Arthur Harrison made arrangements with my client to ensure his wife was taken care of. The documents are clear. The house was pledged as collateral. My client is merely carrying out his brother's intentions." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Then he pressed harder. "Mrs. Harrison is 83 years old. It is not unusual for memory to fail, for confusion to set in after such a devastating loss. It is precisely why Arthur entrusted my client, to safeguard her well-being." I sat still, my hands folded, my face calm. Inside, my blood boiled. He was painting me as a helpless relic, someone too fragile to know her own life. Olivia's hand squeezed mine under the table. "Hold steady," she whispered. Then Ms. Alvarez rose, every movement deliberate, her voice even but commanding. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has presented a narrative woven from deceit. He claims Mrs. Harrison's husband left their home in his care, but the evidence tells another story. The defendant's late husband was a man of integrity who planned his affairs carefully. The will drafted years ago clearly left everything to his wife, then to their children. The document presented by the plaintiff is not only inconsistent with Arthur Harrison's character, it is fraudulent." She walked toward the bench, holding a folder of exhibits. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the plaintiff is not who he claims to be. We will show that his true name is Reginald, a man with a history of embezzlement and fraud. He filed this claim not to honor his brother's wishes, but to steal his identity and erase his own criminal past." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reginald's lawyer objected, sputtering about irrelevance, but Judge Evans lifted a hand. "Proceed, Ms. Alvarez." Piece by piece, Ms. Alvarez dismantled his story. She laid out Arthur's tax returns, bank statements, and savings records, all proving stability, with no trace of the supposed debt. She pointed out discrepancies in the forged agreement, the notary's stamp from a date when Arthur had been hospitalized, the mismatched handwriting in the margins. Each fact struck like a hammer. The confident smirk on Reginald's face tightened into a grimace. Then Ms. Alvarez turned, her gaze steady. "Mrs. Harrison would like to speak." My knees shook as I stood, but not from weakness, from the gravity of the moment. Olivia rose with me, ready to steady me if I faltered, but I waved her hand away. This was my stand to take. I walked slowly to the witness stand, every step measured. When I swore my oath and sat down, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Harrison," Ms. Alvarez said gently, "can you tell the court about your husband in this house?" I lifted my chin, my voice clear. "Arthur and I built our life here in Albany. 52 years of marriage, 2 children, a home filled with love. We were careful with money, careful with planning. We made promises to each other. No secrets, no debts hidden in the dark. He would never have risked our home. Never." I glanced at Reginald, meeting his eyes for the first time since entering the room. His smugness faltered under my gaze. I continued, "When he died, I thought grief would be the hardest battle I'd face. But I was wrong. His brother came to my door with lies, saying Arthur owed him, saying the house belonged to him. He showed me a paper with Arthur's signature. For a moment, I doubted. I wondered if I'd missed something. But I knew my husband. I knew his heart. That paper was a forgery, and every word he spoke was poisoned. My throat tightened, but I pressed on. This man didn't come to care for me. He came to strip me of the only place I have left, using Arthur's memory as a weapon. That isn't family. That's betrayal. The room was silent but for the scratch of the court reporter's keys. Judge Evans leaned forward. Mrs. Harrison, do you have any evidence to support this claim? Olivia rose, retrieving the leather briefcase from our table. With steady hands, she passed it to Ms. Alvarez, who placed it before the judge. Inside lay the damning truth. Bank statements proving years of fraud, letters revealing the name Reginald, photographs showing Arthur and the man beside him, not as brothers but as two very different men. The letter from Reginald's late wife sealed it all, her words naming him not as Mark, but as Reginald, a man who had fled from his crimes. Judge Evans examined the documents carefully, her face stern. When she finally looked up, her eyes cut straight to Reginald. Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice cold steel, these documents point to a pattern of deception. Do you deny that your real name is Reginald and that you have engaged in financial fraud? Reginald's face drained of color. His lawyer stammered, objection. Irrelevant. Overruled, Judge Evans snapped. All eyes turned to him. For once, he had no rehearsed line, no slick answer. He muttered, I don't know what you're talking about. But his voice was thin, broken. Everyone in the room knew the truth. Judge Evans sat back, her gavel poised. This court finds that the plaintiff's claim is fraudulent. The property at 145 Sycamore Lane remains the legal possession of Mrs. Harrison. Furthermore, this evidence will be referred to the district attorney for immediate investigation into identity theft and financial crimes. Court dismissed. Her gavel struck, echoing through the room like thunder. Relief flooded me so powerfully that my knees nearly buckled. Olivia rushed to my side, wrapping her arm around me. Across the aisle, Reginald sat pale and defeated, his lies exposed for all to see. The mask he had worn for so long had finally shattered. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp air felt like freedom itself. I had defended my home, my husband's honor, and my own dignity. For the first time since Arthur's funeral, I lifted my head high. If you believe women of every age deserve respect and protection, subscribe today. And if you don't, at least leave a comment explaining why, because silence only empowers betrayal. When Olivia and I returned home that evening, the house seemed to breathe again. The silence that once pressed down on me like a weight now felt lighter, as though Arthur himself had been waiting for this moment of vindication. The photographs on the mantel no longer reminded me of a battle I had to fight. They reminded me of a love that had been defended and preserved. The judge's ruling had not just secured the roof over my head, it had restored the dignity Arthur deserved in death. Reginald's lies no longer clung to his memory. Instead, the truth had spoken loudly, cutting through the noise of deceit. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once whispered in cautious tones now came by with casseroles and flowers, relief written across their faces. They had seen Reginald's smug charm, had heard his claims, and many had doubted. But now, with the truth exposed, they embraced me with warmth. I realized betrayal could isolate, but justice had a way of bringing community back together. Still, the battle had left its mark. I could not erase the grief of losing Arthur, nor would I ever want to. His absence lingered in the creak of the floorboards, in the quiet of evenings when I reached across the bed and found only emptiness. Yet alongside that sorrow stood something new, peace. I had defended him, just as he had protected me all those years. I had stood in a courtroom where lies tried to cast shadows over his life, and I had held the light of truth steady. That knowledge gave me strength, even in moments when tears still came. Reginald, stripped of his disguise, now faced the consequences he had evaded for decades. Fraud, identity theft, and perjury, charges that would follow him long after he left that courtroom in defeat. He had come for my home, but instead he had lost the very mask he had worn for survival. Justice was slow, but it was certain. One evening, Olivia and I sat in the kitchen, sipping tea. She looked at me with quiet admiration. "You know, Mom," she said, "most people your age would have given up." They would have believed the papers, the lies, the pressure. But you fought. You didn't just fight for the house. You fought for Dad's memory. Her words sank deep into my heart. I thought of the frail woman I had nearly become in the weeks after Arthur's funeral, trembling at the sound of the doorbell, ready to believe I was powerless. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone older, yes, but also unyielding. Grief had not broken me. It had carved out a well of resilience I never knew I carried. I placed my hand over Olivia's. Strength doesn't come from avoiding battles, my dear. It comes from standing up when the fight chooses you. And when family betrays, it's love that carries you through. In the days that followed, I walked through the house with new eyes. Each room carried memories, but they no longer cut like glass. The living room, where Arthur's chair still sat by the window, became a place where I whispered my gratitude at sunrise. The garden, once overgrown during the weeks of court, now flourished again under my care. This house was no longer a battlefield. It was my sanctuary once more. I often thought of Arthur's hidden letter, the one urging me to trust no one. In truth, he had been right to fear Reginald. But he had also underestimated me. Trusting no one kept me cautious. Trusting myself gave me victory. That was the legacy Arthur left me. Not just love, but the courage to guard it fiercely. Betrayal will always sting. It comes sharpest when it's delivered by someone wearing the mask of family. But what I learned through this trial is that betrayal does not define us. Our response to it does. I chose to fight, to stand, to speak when silence would have been easier. In that choice, I found not just justice, but myself again. As I sit here tonight, pen in hand, I realize my story is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who has been underestimated, dismissed, or pressured into silence. It belongs to every widow who has felt her world collapse, only to discover her strength in the rubble. It belongs to every family who has seen betrayal but chosen resilience. Arthur may be gone, but the love we shared and the dignity we defended remain. That is our legacy. And no one, not even Reginald, can take it away. Subscribe now if you believe in stories that remind us we are stronger than betrayal. And if you won't subscribe, share in the comments why, because every voice matters in battles like these. Thank you for watching.